Hello, and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast, a podcast for parents as well as children and youth ministry leaders. We are dedicated to showing how theological study and biblical application relate to the discipleship of children and youth. As always, we're hosted by Pastor Ben Palaz, the pastor of family and children's discipleship at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Tony Trusoni, the family and student pastor at Faith Family Church in Finksburg, Maryland.
Oh, well, Tony, it's good to be back with you. How have you been since the last time we spoke?
I've been doing well in the last few minutes, so it's been a uneventful past few minutes, which is fortunate.
I'm glad to hear that. Okay, yeah, we recorded the first episode, which it does relate to what we want to get into today, but so we'll just get right into it. Tony, how do you know when you've had too much of something?
How do you know I think when you have to go to the doctor because of it would probably be a good way to have too much of something.
Is that like too much bacon or?
Yeah. Although, I wonder if that is even possible. You know, I guess technically, medically, it's very possible to have too much bacon. Yeah. How do you know?
I saw something when I was in high school. It was like every piece of bacon, and every piece of bacon takes off 5 minutes of your life, or something like that. I don't know how they can calculate that, but I do enjoy bacon. I don't eat it very often. Yeah. But there can be. Let me ask you this: can you have too much of a good thing?
I think certainly. I think for many things, I think you can. Life is meant to have variety, and too much of a good thing, I think it makes us expect it, and I think it even takes away from how good of an experience that good thing becomes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, there's broccoli is a good thing. Now, you don't like broccoli, do you?
It is not a good thing. It is not a good thing, my friend.
I had broccoli earlier. I like broccoli, but
I know
you can't only have a what?
I know you do. You like all the nasty foods.
So, but you can't have a diet of only broccoli or green beans and now some people do have the meat only diet. I don't really know about that. Kind of question the wisdom of that, but
hey, I have a seafood diet. I seafood and I eat it.
Oh, well, hey man, if it works for you, gotta eat big to get big. So, but yeah, there's meant to be variety in life, and God doesn't intend for us to just spend all of our time just doing one thing. Even those who are devoted to more of a, I guess a role in the church or something like that, you're not only to do one thing. And so when it comes to family discipleship, we're all about family discipleship, but there's the danger, I think, that we can spend too much time with that, or giving too much attention to our little nuclear family unit that's there at our address, to the neglect of the whole church. And so that's what we want to talk about today. But just kind of to lay the groundwork, Tony, what briefly and kind of generally, what's the Lord's role and His purpose for the family?
Yeah, so I put a couple things. I think one, and very general, going back to even the beginning of Genesis, I think the family is created for the flourishing of society, so that society might be developed, so that the earth might be filled up, and sustainably. But also the home is a launching pad for the next generations. How the home is how the world will be in the next generations. I think biblically, especially in light of Deuteronomy 6 and Ephesians 6, it's a spiritual training ground. But the last thing I'll say about the purpose, I think it's typological. I think the family, especially the marriage, points to Christ's relationship with His church. And so points to something that is eternal, that is more significant than family itself.
That's good. That's just very to the point. And I want to do an episode on marriage relates to family discipleship. And I was actually working on it for this, and I thought, well, it's not ready yet. So, Tony, how long will our family units last?
It depends on how much bacon you eat, right?
That's right.
Yeah. That's a century. I mean, I don't know how long the longest marriage has ever been in history, but I would assume even for those who live an insane amount of time, at best about a century, but most of the time far less than that. But we won't really be family into eternity. I mean, the concept of family that we have, for us, the Trisoni family won't be a thing that exists in the new heavens and new earth. The Pelaz family won't be something that exists. Instead, we'll be in a perpetual state of membership in the church, but singleness.
Yeah, and that's as important as our families are, as important as what goes on in all those different relationships that we have. It's not eternal, and so. But we don't want to make this it's only going to last for a century at best, so it doesn't really matter. Certainly not. But we have to put in perspective that time, God has given us that, entrusted that to us for this time, but it's not ultimate. So when it comes to the discipleship of the rising generations, whose job is it? Is it the family or the church's job?
So last podcast we recorded like literally 45 minutes ago. I answered a question. It was a either or with yes, and this is another either or that I'm going to answer yes. I think the dad is clearly the main spiritual leader, but one way that dads and mothers as well spiritually lead their children is by being in church as a family, and I think the church, even as an equiper, the church works alongside and equips and supplements parental discipleship.
Yeah, it's more responsibility lies with the parents, but when there's kids who are in the orbit of the church does bear some responsibility for that. So, Tony, briefly, how do you think churches can partner with the discipleship efforts of individual families? I mean, we talk about this in a lot of different ways, but just if you're going to sum it up.
Yeah, so, and summing it up, I think one way to sum it up is do what they do. So find what the parents are doing successfully and come alongside and help them in it and find ways that incorporate that in the church. I think that's a very brief way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, you want to encourage them, you want to equip them, and reiterate and promote that they are the ones who are the primary spiritual influencers, caregivers to their kids, however you want to describe that, but that we can't replace them. Now, are there any dangers for families in relationship to the local church? Because every local church is made up of various family unions. When it comes to that dynamic of family discipleship, and then also you're part of a local church, are there dangers that families might encounter in connection to the church?
One is one that we talked about multiple times before, but I think it's really important to reiterate again, is a huge danger of families in relationship to the church is the drop-off approach. The approach of having the professional do the work of discipling your children or youth. I think that's unbiblical and dangerous, and evidence shows that that's going to lead to low statistical likability that your child will continue in the faith as an adult. But I think another danger would be legalistically condemning the church's ministries to children and youth. So I know of a man that he read a very good book, The Perspectives on Family Ministry, which has some different approaches to family ministry. And he came to a very extreme conclusion that any kind of children or youth ministry within the church is wrong. And his response to that was not to take his kids away from that, but was to indict and slander his church for having that kind of thing, for not immediately changing everything about their structure. And dropping it all in a moment's notice. And I think that kind of reaction is hugely dangerous, and maybe even as dangerous as the drop-off approach.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you're right. Which of those two do you think is more common?
Oh, I think the first. Long shot.
Okay, that's what I thought. I think there's much more of that happens. The other is a minority, but I think I've seen a similar kind of approach, and I don't think that's healthy either. So, Tony, can a family overemphasize, quote, family discipleship, where there's an intentional discipleship relationships and instruction and teaching and mentoring kind of thing going on in the home? Can they overemphasize that? And if so, what could it look like, and who might get hurt in the process?
Yeah, so I think the overemphasizing, an example of that would be, well, how would it look like would be what I kind of last described, that extreme case. But I think we absolutely can. And when we do this, we do something that we have a tendency of doing very often as 21st century Americans, which is making the good the enemy of the great. And we can accept the good and alongside the great, which is family discipleship, and the other great, ultimately, which is the church's ministry to children and youth. We have to realize in this kind of thing that our kids' spiritual growth is a cosmic battle against the work of Satan, and to win a soul that's in rebellion against God on its own. And we need all the tools possible. I mean, I wouldn't be content to just rely upon my family to take down Thanos in the Infinity War. I take everything I can get.
That's a good point about using the weapons at your disposal. And God has called individual family members to be involved in a local church, to be connected to that local church. And so, even if you think culturally, I mean, I'm certainly not a historian, but it was not uncommon for people in biblical times to live with extended or very close to extended family members. So it wasn't always just the nuclear family unit like we have today in America, and I mean even other places in the world now. And so those relationships that extend beyond the parents and the children, to aunts, to uncles, and that could even aunts and uncles in the faith, and just significant adults in their lives. And there's research done about that, and I think 5 is the number I've heard, that it's really beneficial for children to have that many adult relationships that are not with their parent. Again, not trying to undermine parental authority and parental influence, but that have those people who love you, love your child, coming into the kid's life. So what would you say, and this touches on a previous episode, but maybe we can flesh it out a little bit more. What would you say to a family who regularly stays away from public worship to have, quote, family time, whether it's vacation, trips, or they just stay at home, this kind of thing?
So I think when they're doing that, they're actually missing the purpose of the family, and having a very, very short term, as in just this life perspective on the purpose of the family. And failing to realize as well with it that our faith is meant to be public. Even our families are meant to, like you said, connected broader beyond ourselves. But further, I think that they're setting a dangerous precedent. I think the reality is that family can become an idol. And it clearly can. I think it's maybe the most common idol in our culture today, to be honest with you. And I think you're setting a dangerous precedent that idolatry of family time is a good and appropriate thing that our kids can embrace.
What is that person valuing? I think it would be good to ask them that. And I mean, even as I look at this and think about it, there's people in our church who that's not uncommon. Or you've seen a pattern of it from time to time. And, these are questions that I should ask them or should have asked them at the time. But, what are you valuing when you do this? And also, probably a common excuse is, well, we were just so busy, and so it's our time to spend together. Well, the follow-up, why are you so busy that this is the only time that you get to spend together as a family? Are there some things that you need to cut off the list so that you can have that? Because you do need time together as a family to grow in those relationships that God has entrusted to you, but you also need to be with his people, and you shouldn't have to choose between those two. You should plan both of those into your schedule because they are that important. And big moments, probably you're not going to make up for a lack of little moments if you're spending that little time together. But I think sometimes that stuff can kind of be a smokescreen for just excuses and laziness and things like that.
Yeah.
Not always, and I'm not trying to throw rocks at people, but I think that we can all of us convince ourselves of what we want to do. We can come up with reasons to justify it.
Mm-hmm.
So how about the case of a family who they stay away from